Well, it's a few days now since the general election results have come in, and it wasn't quite the result that many people were predicting, but it will, of course, have implications for the business community. So I'm joined by Simon Walker, Director General of the IoD. We'll just pick over some of the consequences of that election. But let's start, Simon, by looking at today's figures on unemployment, on job creation, and, of course, on wage growth, which have been pretty encouraging.
Today's figures are very positive for the direction of the economy as a whole. Unemployment is down to 5.5%. It's only a couple of years since 7% seemed an ambitious target, and actually we've gone way better than that. But we are now starting to see a bit of wage growth, 2%. That's ahead of inflation, but it's still reasonably restrained. It's what IoD members would expect them to have to pay their employees, and it seems to me about the right kind of level. It is important that business steps up to the plate and starts raising wages gently if we're to keep prosperity. There's been a bit of a trade-off between having people in jobs and not having wage growth over the recession period. Now it's time to move about a little bit.
Okay, well, let's just look at some of the election results. And as we know now that it's a majority Conservative government, and the cabinet has taken shape, and indeed much of the agenda we know will be concerning the economic recovery and progress in that field, the European referendum, of course, and indeed devolution. Large questions on these areas. What are the priorities going to be from our perspective?
I hope productivity and economic growth are going to be the priorities for the government, and I think we're seeing quite good signs. But what we need to remember is that, come what may, this government is going to be very unpopular in 3 years' time, because that's the way it happens with governments. So they've got to do the tough stuff, the difficult moves, quite soon. I expect in George Osborne's early budget that pundits are saying is going to happen as soon as June, in June. So let's hope that the government does the tough but important things quite early on.
That's going to include, of course, the Davies Commission on airport capacity, airport expansion. That's coming down the line or down the runway pretty quickly.
It is coming down the runway, and I think our position is going to have to be we will support what Davies comes up with, because it is urgent that airport capacity in the southeast is improved. I don't know if it's going to be Heathrow or Gatwick. I don't know what sort of combination of changes is going to be advocated, but I think it's important that whatever Davies comes up with is embraced and enacted quickly without the opportunity for critics to delay it by a decade.
Now, the IoD worked very closely with the business department under Vince Cable. He is now out of the picture, quite emphatically. The new business secretary, Sajid Javid, formerly culture secretary, prior to that, of course, in the Treasury under Osborne, and prior to that, a very successful career in his own right in the private sector. I think this is a man we can work with.
I certainly think Sajid Javid is someone who understands and gets business and appreciates its priorities. Vince Cable was a good business secretary. He had priorities that we share too in areas like diversity, but Sajid Javid is a hard-driven business leader who will be focused on productivity-related issues and on economic growth. He won't give us some of the freebies, perhaps the businesses have come to expect in an easier period, but I think he will set the right course for economic growth, as well as simply the recovery we've had to date.
And let's touch on Europe, because that referendum is now going to happen. We know that IoD members broadly support the principle of having a referendum, but of course that is conditional on there being a process of meaningful reform and renegotiation beforehand.
I think it's time to stop faffing around about whether there should be a referendum, whether a referendum are a good idea or not, and get the reforms that we seek, and then win that referendum and stay in a reformed Europe. That's clearly the desire of the IoD membership, as well as the business community as a whole. But let's not forget, those reforms are extremely important. It's appropriate for Europe overall to set guidelines about trade and openness of borders to trade, population movement and capital movement. That's all important. But it's also important that they leave lifestyle questions, including how employment is regulated, to individual member states.
And finally, Simon, you've had experience yourself in government under John Major, prior to which you've also worked for the Labour Party in New Zealand. The Labour Party here in the UK now going through a period of some turmoil, some soul-searching. We're going to work with them quite closely to reconnect them with the business community and with those aspirational small, medium-sized businesses that they clearly didn't seem to take with them as part of their campaign. What advice do you have for those seeking a Labour leadership now?
I hope that Labour politicians learnt that it's not a good idea to whack business and wealth creation and suggest you can grab money in unlimited quantities from the business sector and companies like tobacco or banks that aren't popular. I hope they've learned that that was a mistake. Many business people, probably most business people, voted Labour in 1997 and in 2001, so it can be done. If the Labour Party engages with the business community in order to create wealth and productivity, it can do well in any election, and governments will change from time to time, so it's imperative that the IoD nationally and the IoD locally starts talking to opposition politicians in order to explain to them what business needs.
Well, we'll be working with those Labour leadership hopeful sisters. We'll be working with those occupying the new offices of state under this majority Conservative government. Keep an eye on all of the policy and its thoughts at iod.com.